Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spin Reviews, and today I'm going to be talking about the new albums from Bon Jovi and Grace Potter. Now these are two reviews I decided to sort of bunch together, mostly because they're both works from artists I like that, one, haven't really been reviewed by any of the reviewers on YouTube, and two, have simply just fallen short for me as a fan, albeit for different reasons. Now first up is the new one from Bon Jovi called Burning Bridges. So I've got a bit of a confession to make. I probably know more about Bon Jovi than anyone born in 1996 has any right to. But the truth is that since around 2006 with their Have a Nice Day album, Bon Jovi's just been a band that I've had some honest connection with for a good majority of my musical life. Whether it be the glam metal that made them big, the underrated hard rock of the 90s and mid-2000s, their odd one-album stint in country rock from back in 2007, whatever else, I've always just found Bon Jovi to be a really consistently good hard rock band with a knack for hooks and likable sincerity. But around the turn of the last decade, things started to get concerning. 2009's The Circle wasn't bad by any means, but there are definitely more dull moments on it than usual, and the follow-up 2013's What About Now was just plain embarrassing, cranking the cliches up to 11, and staying too firmly in its own corny comfort zone to make any real impact outside a song or two, if that. Meanwhile, the previous year, founding guitarist Richie Sambora put out a solo album that was far more interesting, catchy, and diverse than anything seen on What About Now, and of course my suspicions were confirmed when he was essentially forced out of the band at some point last year to a bunch of skepticism and gossip and all that wonderful clickbait kind of stuff. Needless to say, I went into Burning Bridges with pretty low expectations, especially since the band themselves said that this was essentially just scraps from the previous two albums re-recorded under the guise that it's just a fan album until their real new album, which I'm calling bullcrap on right off the bat, because they're still expecting people to pay $12 for this on iTunes in the age of streaming when you can just put whatever you want on YouTube for free if you feel that it's just subpar material. And while it's not as painfully generic as What About Now, Burning Bridges still falls short in my opinion. But that being said, one compliment I'll give this right off the bat is that there are a couple tracks where Bon Jovi actually tries something new and pulls it off pretty well, like on the atmospheric and slow-burning opener or Teardrop to the Sea, or my personal favorite here, Who Would You Die For? The latter's got this cool dark vibe with the sparse verses and the tom-heavy drums coming in after the really well-placed drum machine, and the lyrics that wisely run with the obsessiveness of its premise. Basically about seeing a girl at a party and just letting your mind run wild. It's really interesting imagery at some points. Also, We Don't Run is a solid enough slice of stadium rock that where the cliches are a bit easier to overlook, and tracks like the infectious I'm Your Man and the glorious title track, which is like this campfire sing-along style kiss-off to their longtime record label, really show that Bon Jovi can be more likable when they aren't quite as pretentious and self-serious as they can come off a lot of the time nowadays. Which of course is proven on the other side of things by schlock like We All Fall Down, which basically recycles every stock motivational cat poster in the doctor's office saying in the book, and the other single, Saturday Nights Gave Me Sunday Morning, which not only uses the four chords of pop throughout, which is an automatic thumbs down for me, not only uses the days of the week as a metaphor thing, they already did way better on their older songs, Someday I'll Be Saturday Night, but, and I'm not kidding here, the chorus is a direct ripoff of Nickelback's Gotta Be Somebody. And I'm just sitting here thinking, really? Of all the bands to rip off to try to stay relevant, you choose one of the most universally hated of the past 15 years? Why don't you just make a crunkcore song featuring Silento while you're at it? And speaking of desperation, this album closes with Take Back the Night, an absolute disaster of a radio grab complete with EDM synths slathered on auto-tune, the works. If you took out the guitar of this song and told me this was Calvin Harris featuring John, I'd probably believe you. And one last comment I gotta point out, Richie's absence is really felt here. The guitars barely stand out, with only a couple solos worth noting, and pretty much no memorable riffs to be found. At the end of the day, while, like I said, this isn't their worst album to date, it's still a pointless one, and it gets a 5 from me. But at this point, these guys could throw out any kind of schlock, and the fans will eat it up and make it #1, even above David Bowie's comeback album, which I still haven't frankly forgiven them for. So why even try at this point? Am I right? And the second album I'm going to be talking about is Grace Potter's Midnight. Grace Potter, of course, known as the frontwoman of Grace Potter and the Nocturnals, a band that I've been a fan of for a few years now. While honestly, I think their first couple albums are just serviceable but pretty unmemorable roots rock revivalism, when they broke through in 2010 with that self-titled album and the single Paris, I really got into them. And their 2012 one, The Lion, the Beast, the Beat, with their mix of driving hard rock, tight hooks, and of course Grace's powerhouse voice. That being said, I instantly got concerned when the rollout for Grace's debut major label solo album started, mostly because without any announcement, the Nocturnals' Facebook page just all of a sudden switched to everything, including its URL, to be Grace's solo career page, which I can only assume means that the Nocturnals are done, and probably not on amicable terms. And I'm sad to say my feelings were mostly justified, because while not quite as terrible as I thought it was on first listen, Midnight is a failed experiment all around that finds Grace going pop and not exactly in the best way. To point out the biggest problem of this album, Grace's raw, wailing voice just doesn't fit at all over these chintzy 80s synthesizers and sterile drum machines that appear all across this thing. And I'm just being blunt here, there are YouTube mashups that have less vocal production mismatch than this album. And I don't think I'm just being a rock purist here. I actually really like the bits of electronics and tighter production that was used on The Lion, the Beast, the Beat, especially on songs like Never Go Back, for example. But that album was poppy in the same way that, say, a Broken Bells album or the last Paramore album was poppy. Whereas here, she just sounds so desperate to be the next Ellie Goulding or Ariana Grande, and coming from a casual fan of both those artists, she doesn't do a very good job at it. I'll put it like this. Imagine there was a sketch on, say, Funny or Die or something, where Grace Potter and the Nocturnals star in it, and it's like a behind the music parody, where a big joke in it is that Grace broke up the band at some point to start like this awkward, failed pop solo career. This album, or at least the first 3 tracks, is the soundtrack to that joke. Out of those first 3, I guess I'll give Alive Tonight a little bit of credit for the decent enough guitar part, but it gets all thrown away on this generic dance pop chorus. Same goes for Biggest Fan and Nobody's Born with a Broken Heart, where she suddenly thinks she's this 80s pop star or something, and it just gets really cheesy and unpleasant to listen to. But anything beats the really confusingly written Your Girl. Basically, from what I'm gathering, Grace is the mistress to this guy, then she meets the guy's actual girlfriend, and instead of getting rightfully pissed, she develops a crush on the girlfriend, and then she instead is pissed at the guy for letting them be in the same room together. Okay, this just sounds like the plot of a bad rom-com, and a really poorly framed one at that. Going to positives though, Empty Heart is probably the best fusion of older and newer sounds on this thing, and with the nice acoustic guitar chords up against the crisp hand claps and the little sound effect that weirdly becomes a cool hook after a while, and it's helped by the really charmingly flirty lyrics. Also gotta point out the confident message and great meaty bass line in Look What We've Become, and the rollicking groove in Instigators that makes it easily the most Nocturnals-esque song on this album. And despite my initial complaint, Delirious has just the right amount of vintage appeal to it that it actually kinda works for Grace's delivery, and definitely should have been the first single instead of Live Tonight if they were going for the dance floor banger angle. It also has this really out of place but kinda awesome moment in the last 2 minutes where all of a sudden everything fades out and then it roars back with this dramatic, wordless rock section with insane vocals from Grace. No idea why it's there, but it's still great nonetheless. I just wish that she had explored more of this intensity across more of this album. Though oddly enough, the last couple tracks I gotta point out are more on the ballad side of things, The Minor and Let You Go, which really explore that part of her songwriting in a great way. And now, I'm not a big country fan, but with the collabs she's done lately with the likes of Kenny Chesney and Willie Nelson that have turned out pretty well, and with the fact that the Nocturnal's highest charting single, Stars, is practically a pop country ballad in and of itself, I was really hoping that Grace would have explored more of that singer-songwriter side when it came time to make a solo album instead of trying and failing to be a pop star. So overall, I just ended up falling in the middle with this thing, and I'm going to give it a 5.5. Now if you guys have heard either of the albums talked about in this video, let me know what you thought of them. If you agreed with me, if you disagreed, have any feedback about this channel or this new setup on a different angle in my room. Hopefully there's better lighting here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and be sure to be civil if you do disagree. Share this around with anyone who might be interested. Like the Facebook page in the description for updates, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode of Spin It Reviews.